Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember to support, subscribe. The tragic life of Catherine Howard. Catherine was born somewhere between 1518 and 1524, but her exact date of birth is unknown. Born to the younger brother of the 3rd Duke of Norfolk and cousin to Anne Boleyn, Catherine was born to an aristocratic family. There isn't a lot known about her childhood, but it is noted that her mother was dominant and providing, and that she had a weak, debt-ridden, hen-pecked father, meaning he was either criticised or given orders from his wife. Unfortunately for Catherine, her mum died when she was around age 10 or 12, and that meant that she had to be sent to live with her step-grandmother, Agnes, Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. It is thought that the young Catherine had few prospects. Catherine as a child spent her time with wards and companions in a shared dorm in the home of the Dowager Duchess. Catherine and her friends had no supervision, and in turn this allowed them to entertain male admirers. Catherine was described as being young, merry, and vivacious. She was certainly not scholarly or devout. The household had been compared to a slackly run boarding school. When Catherine was around 13, she is said to have had a relationship with her music teacher, Henry VIII. He had been employed to teach her to play the virginals, a keyboard instrument, and in 1541, when Catherine was charged with treason, both she and Mannoc were questioned about the relationship, but both denied ever having intercourse. Catherine then had a longer sexual relationship with a young noble, Francis Derham. He was a secretary in her grandmother's household between 1537 and 1539. The pair almost certainly became lovers and even addressed each other as husband and wife. Francis even trusted Catherine with his money whilst he was travelling, but the jealous Henry VIII informed the Dowager Duchess, who quickly put an end to the relationship. Some historians believe that Catherine's relationship with both men were non-consensual, and she had been taken advantage of, with no way of defending herself. Whilst living with her grandmother, Catherine was sexually exploited, whilst only being in her early teens. It was all very well to describe Catherine's easy charm and good nature, but it is questionable to do so about a girl who from around the age of 11 had older men coming into her bedroom, especially when Mannix was in a position of responsibility as her music teacher. Catherine then went on to meet Henry VIII through his wife at the time, Anne of Cleves. Catherine was reportedly young and beautiful as Anne's maid of honour. Anne and Henry were only married for 6 months, the shortest of all 6 wives, but Henry only married her because he wanted new allies, and marrying Anne would mean a major boost of reformation in England. Whilst at court, Catherine had a relationship with Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the King's Privy Chamber, and there were rumours that the pair were to be married. But it was Henry who secured her hand, having fallen in love with Catherine and even sending her gifts and love letters. Henry and Catherine, just 3 weeks after the annulment of his previous marriage, married at Oatlands Palace in Surrey, making her his 5th queen. For Catherine, it was a truly spectacular rise from obscurity to the seat of power. After the collapse of the marriage to Anne, Henry was adamant he wanted to choose a new bride for himself, and he fell head over heels for Catherine Howard. Henry was nearly 50 years old when he married the teenage Catherine, at least 30 years older than she was, and he was failing in health, incapacitated by an ulcerated jousting wound in his leg, and Henry's girth had increased at an alarming rate. When he became king, he was thought to have been a trim 32 inches around the waist, but by the time he met Anne of Cleves, it was closer to 52 inches. But Catherine Howard restored Henry to the youth and vitality that he thought he'd lost, and after an extended honeymoon, they settled into married life, and Catherine showed every sign of becoming a good queen. Catherine had been married to Henry for just 18 months when she was then executed at the Tower of London on the 13th of February 1542, and in that time she did not bear any children. It was speculated that Henry, who was nearly 50 years old when he married Catherine, was impotent. Examining Henry's marriage to his previous wife, Anne of Cleves, Henry's inability to consummate the marriage to Anne had been traditionally assigned to his revulsion at his new bride. But it is at least equally possible that he was impotent. He was nearly twice his young bride's age and had become increasingly immobile in recent years, and there had been no talk of a mistress for some time. But whilst Catherine had no children of her own, she was stepmother to Mary and Elizabeth. Catherine was at very least 2 years younger than Henry's eldest daughter Mary, and possibly even 7 years younger, and this made it difficult for Catherine in her role as a stepmom. It is thought that the relationship between the two was fraught, and that Catherine had tried to remove 2 of Mary's attendants because she believed that the princess showed her less respect than she did her predecessors. But that being said, their relationship did eventually settle down, and they treated each other cordially. Catherine even approved of Henry's decision to allow Mary to reside at court. Catherine even gave Mary a gold pomander, bejewelled with rubies and pearls, as a gift. Meanwhile, Catherine found herself a fan in her young stepdaughter, the Princess Elizabeth, who is thought to have been 7 years old when Catherine married Henry VIII. Related by blood through Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, Catherine's first cousin. The pair are said to have enjoyed one another's company during the few occasions on which they met. Catherine Howard's biggest mistake, many have argued, was continuing her affair with Thomas Culpeper after she had married Henry VIII. It is thought that Catherine's maid, Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, who had previously testified against her husband George Boleyn and her sister-in-law Anne Boleyn, helped Catherine to meet Culpeper in secret while the king was away from court. But it was Catherine's earlier liaisons that ultimately sealed her fate. In the summer of 1541, as Henry's court embarked upon a royal progress to the North Country, rumours of Catherine's previous indiscretions continued to haunt her, and she was forced to give favours and positions in return for silence. News of Catherine's indiscretions eventually reached Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury and a close friend of Henry VIII. Cranmer was told that Catherine's music teacher, Henry Mannock, had boasted that he knew Catherine's privates from all others by a privy mark, while Francis Derham was so familiar with Catherine afore her marriage to the king that he did lie with her 100 nights in the year in his doublet and hose a bed between the sheets. Catherine's relationship with Francis Derham, whom she had supposedly called husband and had sex with, would have invalidated her marriage to the king, because Catherine and Francis would technically have been married according to canon law enforced by the church. Knowing this, Cranmer detailed the allegations in a letter addressed to Henry. It is thought that when the court returned from progress, Cranmer left the letter in Henry's pew in the Chapel Royal for him to find. Investigations into Catherine's past quickly followed. Derham, who was arrested and tortured, confessed and named Culpeper, who was also arrested and confessed under torture. Mannox, meanwhile, was released. Catherine, who always denied a pre-contract of marriage with Derham, was charged with treason and was exiled to Sion House, formerly Sion Abbey, which is now in West London. Then it was in the parish of Isleworth, in the country of Middlesex. The former lovers found themselves accused of malicious intent under the 1534 Treason Act, under which anyone could be judged a traitor. It was thought that Catherine had intended to commit adultery with Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper. So whilst she was innocent of any actual crime, the terms of the 1534 Treason Act allowed Henry to condemn her for presumptive treason. Both Derham and Culpeper were tried. Their guilt being predicated on the presumption of Catherine's, they were condemned to death for treason. Derham was hung, drawn and quartered, whilst Culper was beheaded. The heads of both men were displayed on pikes on London Bridge. Catherine, meanwhile, would not face trial, but instead would be condemned to death by an act of attainder, signed by her own husband's hand. Catherine was beheaded at the Tower of London on 9 a.m. on Monday the 13th of February 1542, along with Lady Jane Rochford. Catherine had been married to Henry for just 18 months. Although it is not possible to pinpoint Catherine's exact age when she died, it is thought that she was at most 21 and even as young as 17. Legend has it that Catherine stood on the scaffold ready to meet her Maker, and she said the following: "I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Thomas Culper." But is that true? It is thought that those words come from an anonymous chronicle of King Henry VIII, better known as the Spanish Chronicle, which had been translated to English. Contradicting reports say that Catherine did not utter those words, but I think that maybe she had wished it. When Catherine was arrested at Hampton Court Palace in November of 1541, it is thought that she broke free from the guards and ran, screaming down the corridors to the private chapel royal, where Henry had been believed to be at mass. Catherine screamed to the king for mercy, but all to no avail. A truly sad life and death for poor Catherine, still only a child. She suffered a fate that certainly makes you feel incredibly sad for her. Recent accounts at Hampton Court Palace talk of her ghost running and screaming in what is now known as the Haunted Gallery. Is this a myth, or does the soul of the poor girl still walk this earthly realm? Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.